Today's subject is the secret of the Vedas, an introductory talk on the Vedas and its connection with the science and philosophy of yoga. Sri Aurobindo's most important expository work on the Veda appeared in the Arya in 24 consecutive installments between August 1914 and July 1916. Sri Aurobindo never revised it, apart from minor alteration in one of the chapters. All these essays were published first time in 1956 in a form of a book called The Secret of the Veda. Veda has been known for containing the highest spiritual truths that the human mind is capable to receive. In today's session, we are requesting our speakers to share the background of this most uplifting and secret knowledge, its meaning and its connection to the modern science and philosophy of yoga. And most importantly, the new paradigm that Sri Aurobindo added to this subject of Veda in his works. Sri Aurobindo begins with the sentence on this subject: is there at all, or is there still, a secret of the Veda? Our esteemed panelists tonight are Dr. David Frawley. Dr. David Frawley, Pandit Vamadeva Shastri, is a Vedic teacher, Vedacharya, and author of over 40 published books on yoga, Ayurveda, Vedic studies, translated into 20 languages worldwide. Vamadeva received the Padma Bhushan Award from the Government of India for his Vedic educational work. He has a Doctor of Letters from S. Vyasa in Bangalore and from Ram Manohar Lohia, Ayodhya University. He received the National Eminence Award from the South Indian Education Society, SIES, in Mumbai. He has been one of the main teachers bringing yoga, Ayurveda, and Jyotish to the West, helping to found programs, schools, and associations throughout the world. He has been a student of Sri Aurobindo's work for over 50 years. MP Pandit, the then secretary of the Aurobindo Ashram, began publishing his Vedic translation in Sri Aurobindo's publication in 1980. Vamadeva is director of the American Institute of Vedic Studies in the United States, Vedanet.com, which offer resources and courses in Vedic knowledge, systems of yoga, Vedanta, Ayurveda, and Jyotish. And our second panelist, Dr. Alok Pandey, is a medical doctor, author, poet, philosopher known widely in Sri Aurobindo circle for his talks and writings on diverse subjects, especially Sri Aurobindo's epic poem Savitri. He has authored a number of books and articles. He edits 2 magazines and offers his service in the Sri Aurobindo Ashram since over 15 years, after taking voluntary retirement from the Indian Air Force, where he serves for 20 years. And we have also Dr. Jayanti Ravi, Secretary of the Aurobindo Foundation, which is joining us. Welcome, Dr. Jayanti Ravi, Dr. David Frawley, and Dr. Alok Pandey. Before handing it over to Dr. Jayanti Ravi for the opening remarks, please note that there will be time for questions towards the end of this webinar. So please kindly post any question you have in the Q&A box rather than the chat box. At this time, I would like to open with Dr. Jayanti Ravi for her remarks.
Namaste. I'm extremely happy and delighted that we're all today on a very special day. Today happens to be the Panchami here, Ardra Nakshatram, and it's a very special day because as a part of the 150th birth anniversary of Sri Aurobindo, we thought we must have a series of webinars, and we have 2 very, very great stalwarts, absolute people who have contributed immensely to this field, to reflect on the contribution of someone who was instrumental in unraveling the secret of the Vedas again, which for a long time, although it means knowledge, for a long time, the tradition of knowledge of the highest spiritual truth, but it had been described by various Western scholars back then as something being a book of kind of colossal fiction, and which it was believed to be just something which contained the notings of naive, superstitious fancies of untaught, materialistic. I'm quoting some of these words, barbarians, etc., who were concerned more with the external gains and were ignorant of all but the most elementary moral notions, it was believed back then. But Sri Aurobindo was the one who completely brought this out for a lot of us, for the modern world. And it is due to him that this again got a new lease of, although there is something which is so very powerful and we don't really, truth would not really wait for someone to pave its way. But nevertheless, this is a huge contribution that he has made. So what could be a more befitting contribution as we begin these webinar series than this? I also want to, at the outset, express my deep gratitude to Professor Kirit Joshi, who had the privilege of being educated by him on many topics, including this very book, The Secret of the Vedas. And if we find many of us have tried to understand what the Vedas stood for, but we found it a little too difficult, a little dense to comprehend, and also the fact that many of us may not have had the privilege of really being completely introduced to Sanskrit traditions right from the beginning and the Vedic traditions. But it was him, Sri Aurobindo, where we saw a clear statement of what it stood for. And he too, it is to be fair, probably started with the kind of conclusion of European scholarship at that time. But it is known, and I too have had the opportunity of visiting Sri Aurobindo Nivas in Baroda, where we know of the experience that he first had of the transcendental silent Brahman as he sat on the swing and as he was initiated by his guru, Sri Lele, back then. And after that, he was detained in the Alipur jail, and in the prison, he had this profound experience of Krishna Kaliyan for 15 days. He also heard the voice of Swami Vivekananda guiding him. And he did realize that this transcendental silent Brahman actually permeates everything. He says he saw Krishna Vasudeva in everything, everyone around him. And subsequently, before coming to Pondicherry, again, when he lived at Chandranagar, he lived in deep meditation, and it is there's evidence to say that he had reached the last level of physical subconscious, and he had vision to the extreme overmind border as well. But it is after coming to Pondicherry when he began studying the Veda, and in a matter of about 4 years, something which is an immense quantum of work that was completed by him to give us a lot of insights into this. And I want to quote him here. At this time, there began to arise in my mind an arrangement of symbolic names attached to certain psychological experiences which had begun to regularize themselves. And among them came the figures of 3 female energies, Ila, Saraswati, Sarama, representing severally 3 out of the 4 faculties of intuitive reason: revelation, inspiration, and intuition. But he also at that time found that there was no sufficient explanation, or hardly any explanation, for the experiences that he was having, either in the European psychology or any of the other texts back then. And that is when he started reading this, and also found a statement in one of the hymns of Vamadeva, where the poet speaks of secret words of knowledge, which express their meanings only to the seer. And that was something, it was a big revelation for him and his experiences. So it was not as if Sri Aurobindo read the Vedas and then experienced, but his experiential knowledge was in a way corroborated. It was endorsed by what he read in the Vedas. And he also realized that it's as if the Vedic word was touched by him in a very, very powerful way. And he saw that the secret vibrations of the word, it started revealing all its resonances, all its cadences, and that the secrets started to manifest themselves for him. And that is when he also refers to Vedic poetry as mantric poetry, and also explains in future poetry, he talks about the various characteristics of it. But after that, he also says, when one really has to go on this path, and the reason why it was veiled in this kind of secrecy, because he says that it could only be done safely after a very careful, a very long, and a very difficult training, discipline, purification of the nature, and that it may not have been done by ordinary men without really going through these endurance tests of the mind, spirit, psychological endurances. And then he also says, I quote him, if men entered into these things without a severe test and training, it would be dangerous to themselves and others. This knowledge, these powers could be misused, misinterpreted, turned from truth to falsehood, from good to evil. A strict secrecy was therefore maintained, the knowledge handed down behind a veil from master to disciple. And a veil of symbols was created behind which these mysteries could shelter, formulas of speech also which could be understood by the initiated, but were either not known by others or were taken by them in an outward sense, which carefully covered their true meaning. And that is when he felt, he also came to this hypothesis, and he felt that the Vedas had a double aspect, and the two, although they were related, he felt that they had to be kept apart. And this then led him to undertake the task of the primary intention of the Vedas, to unravel, to dig it out and figure that out. And it also led to a lot of research. And one of our very, very eminent panelists today has done a lot of research. Vamadevaji, Dr. David Frawley, has done a lot of work which he would be sharing with us. And then he goes on to say how there are 7 worlds in principle, 5 in practice, and talks about the supreme, which is the Satchitananda, the triple divine worlds, the link world, which is the super mind manifested in Swar, Satyam, Vritam, Brihat. And then, of course, the triple lower world of the physical matter, earth, and then the life force, antariksha, and pure mind or heaven, the Dyaus. And in this way, he then also talks about human ascension and how it actually provides significance to the life of man from being ordinary. And so he says, when man who ascends to that truth consciousness strives no longer as a thinker, but is victoriously the seer, he's no more Manishi, he is a Rishi. His will, life, thought, emotions, sense, act are all transformed into values of peace and truth, and remain no longer an embarrassed or a helpless vehicle of mixed truth and falsehood. He follows a swift and conquering straightness. And he also then goes on to explain how to do it. So not only did he unravel the secret of this, which for a lot of us educated in the Western, predominantly Western method of education, this approach helped unravel it and also gives the algebraic equivalence of what some of these symbols and words mention, and also the how to, the manual, so to say, the secret ascension, according to him, is sacrifice. And of course, he also explains that Vedic yajna is psychological in character, to indicate that all action is consecrated to the gods and or to the supreme. And he also talks of the offerings of yajna, which are primarily ghrita and soma, and ghrita, which is nothing but ghee or clarified butter. And he talks about the clarity of thought, which is symbolic, and it is represented by ghrita. And soma, of course, is the purification of all the members of the being, which are widely spread out of the sieve of purification. And he also talks about how cows and horses, which are very often used in Vedas, how they symbolize the true companion ideas of light and energy, consciousness and force, chit, shakti, as we say. And also then goes on to say what are the conditions that are indispensable if the truth of Surya is to be established firmly in a mortal nature. And he talks about the 4 aspects, Varuna, who symbolizes vast purity and wideness, destructive of all sins and crooked falsehood. And then he also goes to describe Mitra, who symbolizes the luminous power of harmony, love, comprehension, in terms of also synthesizing and bringing harmony in our thoughts, acts, impulses, words, all of that. And then he also talks that we have to have an immortal strength of clear, discerning aspiration, which is symbolized by Aryaman. And of course, the last condition is of a happy spontaneity, and where we can enjoy all the things, dispelling the evil dream of sin, error, of something which is not representing the divine or suffering. And this is bhaga. And in this way, he goes on to explain. And what is very special about the Vedas also is that they had in the first mandala declared, the Vedic rishis, that the priest of the word with a capital W climbs thee like a ladder, O 100-powered, as one ascends from peak to peak. There is made clear the much that still has to be done. So in that sense, it is not something which is static, dead, ossified, but there is ever-ending scope there for everyone. And that is where we've also had examples of people like Sri Chaitanya, who developed an intensity for bhakti, and even Sri Aurobindo's own integral yoga, where Mother again goes on to explain. And this is something that Kirit Bhai had shared with me. Mother had actually told him that it's not as if he just took that forward, but he brought about a great, shall we say, a point of inflection, a great change, where he also talks of this descent into the physical, into the body, and how you can spiritualize all of this. And so what he received about the supermind too, it was not a derived knowledge, but something that he actually experienced. And he found all these confirmatory revelations in what he read there. Now, I want to end with a few things which I think also, in a way, lay the foundation of what we're all, in a very sincere way, collectively aspiring to do as a part of the webinar series on this very, very special occasion too, which has a relevance with the secret of the Vedas. Sri Aurobindo actually makes a very important statement in the foundations of Indian culture, and he speaks of 3 tasks that India has to accomplish. And first of all, he says we have to recover the ancient spiritual knowledge in all its fullness and amplitude. Of course, this means the Veda, Upanishads, Gita, Puranas, Tantras. And Mother had also once shared with Kirit Bhai, and she said, India has, or rather had, the knowledge of the spirit. So she again underscored the fact that India could take pride in the past glory, but it couldn't take pride in the fact that this is today indeed available in India. So we still have a lot of work to be done on this front. The second task, which I think is extremely important, is how this knowledge is to be poured literally into new modes of philosophical, scientific, critical knowledge that we have today. And I must say that these are very, very clear action points for all of us. And this is very difficult, but right now, a lot of us are collectively working towards setting up something called the multiversity. So there too, across various disciplines, if we can pour that knowledge instead of approaching disciplines in the conventional way, where it is all the intellectual domination from the mental state, but if we can really look at it in this way. And in fact, he wrote a huge, in Life Divine, he has demonstrated, Sri Aurobindo has written how ancient knowledge can be poured into philosophical modes of thinking and how it is extremely relevant in the modern times in a modern way. And the third task also that Sri Aurobindo said was to deal with contemporary problems. So not only putting it in systems of knowledge and learning, how to look at various disciplines, but how to use this approach for dealing with contemporary problems and actually realize or arrive at a spiritualized society. And in some way, Mother and Sri Aurobindo, in a very, very direct manner, we can say that this third task, in fact, all the 3 tasks have been initiated in this beautiful place that they have, through their ideas, direct action, and through their vision, actually laid the foundations for, and where we have the privilege today of being associated with it, Auroville. And here we really want to use this opportunity also of the seminars, the windows, to again reach out. I know that this seminar this webinar has been organized with a lot of partnerships from different people, and I see that it has been oversubscribed, and I'm very happy that so many of you are showing interest in it. And we would really like to welcome all of you connected directly, indirectly with Aurobindo to come here, contribute to it by actually helping carry out these tasks. And if we can actually invite you here as tourists, as visitors, as interns, volunteers, and then later, if you find it suitable, and if we too feel that there is an appropriateness of match, we would love all of you to come here and join this beautiful experiment, which is a direct, shall I say, a direct injunction of Mother at Sri Aurobindo in terms of taking all these Vedic ideas and manifesting them. And we could, in fact, as was suggested by the chairman of our governing board a few days back, I had a very nice conversation with Sri David Frawley as well. We are also thinking if we could perhaps lay the foundations of a Sri Aurobindo Institute of Vedic Studies here, where we look at the esoteric part, not just the practical implementation of it as it happens in various Vedic pathshalas, but actually unraveling this and making this accessible in the context of the new education policy. Because unfortunately, over the years, there has been a kind of invisible untouchability. There are students with this great hunger and aspiration studying in some of the most premier institutions across India and the world. They may not automatically have pathways of accessing this kind of knowledge. So if we can make that available, I think it would be a great contribution again. And we know that all, as Sri Aurobindo said, all life is yoga. And in that, I think this approach, of course, following all the conditions, all the processes, methods, and of course, first of all, understanding it deeply with a great deal of study, reverence to scholars who have handed it over, I think we could really play that role in helping slowly create that little laboratory, that place on earth where all these things could be actually tried out, and how we could really create the world that they spoke about in a small way, make a beginning for it, where we could really have reach out for our highest aspiration and have this Vedic approach to solving all the contemporary problems, projects, and then gradually to the next stage of evolution. So once again, I'm extremely happy that we're starting something very special on the special day. And I'm eagerly looking forward to listening to Sri Alok Pandeyji and Professor David Frawley, Vamadevaji, and for these great spiritual feasts, treats, and as we also look at this as the manifestation of one of the dreams of Sri Aurobindo, of really the spiritual gift of India to the world. And as we offer something, I think we too, in the process, tend to get a lot out of this. So I'm really looking forward to this, and do again want to extend a very warm welcome and invitation to all of those aspiring souls, men and women of goodwill, as Mother said, to come and join us in this experiment and contribute in whatever way, take up any activity, any thought, any study, which can really help all of us attain and reach closer to this highest aspiration that we've all been trying to pursue. Namaste. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jayanti Ravi, for this inspiring opening and invitation. And straight away, I will invite Dr. David Frawley to share with us his input.
Namaste, Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Thank you, Dr. Ravi, for that wonderful and important introduction. It is my great honor to be with you today and for this first webinar in this Sri Aurobindo series, and also as part of these celebrations of the 150th birth anniversary of Sri Aurobindo and the 75th anniversary of India and its independence, which are, of course, closely related together. In my own background, I started studying Sri Aurobindo's work some more than 50 years ago. And in the Life Divine, I saw these little quotes from Rig Veda and Vedas. So that got my curiosity going as to what are the Vedas. I already had a sense of symbolic languages, And I was already someone who believed in the depth and antiquity of civilization and the existence of earlier, greater spiritual civilizations in the world. The idea of ancient sages, rishis, seven seers, we find in many places, whether from the Americas to Egypt to China to India. And we see that our current humanity is just one of many, and our views of civilization are also one of many, and that we are not simply unique. There is a greater spiritual heritage that we have, and that greater spiritual heritage is best preserved through the Vedas. So we also talk about our global Vedic heritage and our world Vedic connections, as well as, of course, the foundations of India. So I then discovered this book, The Secret of the Vedas. And I remember I was taking actually a bus ride from Canada back to the United States. I'd been staying in a spiritual commune there. And I decided to look into the book. And it was in the evening. And when I went to the hymns to the dawn, Ushas, there was an inner opening or vision of a procession of innumerable dawns pervading humanity, the universe, connecting everything together. And from that point on, I became dedicated to the Vedic vision. I've said elsewhere that the study of Rig Veda has been the foundation of everything else I've done in the fields of yoga, Vedanta, Ayurveda, Jyotish, etc. And that came with me. Some years later, I was in contact with Sri Anandamayi Ma, and she inspired me to do more study of Vedas, Upanishads. And shortly thereafter, I came into contact with M.P. Pandit of the Aurobindo ashram and showed him my work. And I said, look, this is just my private study, and I hope it is of some value. I'm not a scholar, all of these things. I'm not an academic. So he said to me, he says, that's very good, because you're not coming from that academic background. You can see things that they cannot see. And he said, I want to publish your works in India, but I want you to write something more. So in 3 months, by typewriter, of course, we didn't have computers then, I did a 500-page work of translations from Rig Veda and sent them to him. And he began introducing them in Aurobindo publications, World Union, the Advent, and related publications, and then some books we also did. So, but I want to bring in here some additional factors also relative to this anniversary. One last point. I brought out my book on the Secret of the Vedas from my library today, and I happened to open it up, and it says, Sri Aurobindo Centenary, August 15th, 1972, 50 years old book. So that was also a kind of coincidence here. Now, the question of the Vedas is huge and vast. Sri Aurobindo had even said it's the most important question or examination in world scholarship today. And the question of the Vedas exists on many levels. I'm going to touch a little bit on the historical and cultural side. In India, the Vedas had kind of gone into the background over so many thousands of years and were used in a more secondary, ritualistic way. And the main texts of study started Upanishads, Gita, Mahabharata, Ramayana, Puranas. Now, as many of you know, in the 18th and 19th centuries, colonial era, it was discovered that there were very strong connections between Sanskrit and all the Indo-European languages, they call them, and the ancient cultures of Europe, West, and Central Asia, going back long before Christianity. Even the Greeks were a later phase of that. So there was a Western discovery of the Vedas as well. And as Jayanti has mentioned, they tended to reduce the Vedas to the outer physical world, nature worship, put them in the context of comparative European mythology, and actually remove the Vedas from the Indian context and the yogic interpretations and put their own type of imprint on them. And that is what people know and study as the Vedas in schools and universities today. But actually, it's gotten much worse. Current Vedic scholarship in the West is dominated by neo-Freudian and neo-Marxist schools, which of course would not have a vision of rishis, yogis, or anything else. Now, Sri Aurobindo, of course, was a great kshatriya. He was a great leader in India's independence movement. And part of that was the reclamation of the Vedas. A lot of that, of course, began with the Swami Dayananda of Arya Samaj. But Sri Aurobindo brought that out at a deeper level, and he addressed all these issues. He more or less said Veda is the root and the origin of Indian civilization, or what we call Bharatiya Sanskriti, and all of what we call yoga, mantra, Sanatana Dharma. But he also said even world spirituality. The rishis were these great proverbial ancient sages, Sapta rishis, seven seers, that established the paths to truth, realization, divine realization, self-realization at the dawn of history, or even before most of what we know of as history. And all the ancient cultures look back to such great sages. I've mentioned that just briefly already. And if we look at the ancient civilizations, for example, ancient Egypt of the third millennium BCE had the largest temples. So this idea that we're always going forward isn't always true. So there is a secret of earlier humanities, earlier yugas, ancient rishis. And in India, you have the concept of the Sanatana Dharma, or an eternal tradition. You have Vedas and rishis ascribed to every yuga, to every loka. They change by name. But the Vedas are said to represent the powers of cosmic creation, secrets of cosmology, as well as history. And the Vedas provide the foundation through the Vedangas and Upavedas for all aspects of India's dharmic civilization, whether it's yoga, Vedanta, Ayurveda, Jyotish, Sanskrit, music, dance, Vastu, all of that. So it's the fountainhead of the Indian civilization and reflects the world tradition of the ancient spirituality. And Sri Aurobindo covered all those aspects, not just the higher yoga. He discussed the history. He was a master of language. His statement on linguistics and origins of language, I think that's also in Secret of the Veda, is probably, I would say, the most important works on linguistics ever done. And he even addressed the comparative Indo-European studies. And then, of course, he did his own translations. Now, the Vedic is not just a matter of Sri Aurobindo's yoga. It's a matter of world civilization. And it's also a matter of the identity of India, the whole, which began then. And so the idea of the Western scholars was to deconstruct no India, no Bharata. Vedas came from the outside. Vedas had more connections to Europe than they did to India. Aryan invaders came from Europe and the Middle East and set up India's civilization some 3,000 years ago. And what we call India was just a gradual compilation of invaders and adaptations, and a totally different view. Now, and that of course started at an interpretation level, Vedas as nature worship, Vedas as the same type of kind of primitive ritualism you have among native and indigenous traditions throughout the world. So this was challenged by Aurobindo, of course, at the level of interpretation, others as well, we will discuss that too. But also, India started to develop its own sense of history. And I've been involved with that too, but I just wanted to say briefly, I wanted to go over this. The new work of the Archaeological Survey of India, particularly under my friend B.B. Lal, who was the head of that organization. There's no archaeological evidence of any Aryan invasion or outside intrusion of anyone into India establishing the ancient civilization. And nothing of that has ever been found, even though some archaeologists from the West proposed that. So that is one point. Second point, the Geological Survey of India became involved, and they found out very clearly that the ancient civilization of India was based upon a large river that once flowed from the Himalayas to the Run of Kutch, which essentially goes through Kurukshetra, Haryana, and is identical with the Saraswati that is spoken of in the Vedic text. Saraswati is the great river of the Vedas. Aurobindo also mentions that. It's a river of knowledge, but it was an actual river. And that river dried up towards the end of the Vedic period. In Mahabharata, it is broken, it no longer reaches the sea. So even the stages of the Saraswati are there. 2/3 of the archaeological sites are on the dried banks of the Saraswati. Largest site of the archaeology is the site called Rakhigarhi, right in Kurukshetra. In fact, Kurukshetra was not only the land of the Kurus, it was the land of the Purus, the Bharatas, or what we call the Vedic people, but they had also established their areas throughout India, from the Sarayu in Bihar in the east to the ocean in the south, and all the way even into Afghanistan. This is where we also find some of these Harappan ruins. And in one of the works I did, one of my books, God, Sages, and Kings, I correlated 150 references to the ocean in the Rig Veda alone, 2 oceans, 4 oceans, crossing the sea, ships with 100 oars, and so on. So the Vedic was a maritime culture. Varuna is the god of the cosmic ocean. Indra releases the 7 rivers to flow into the sea. So this whole issue of India's identity is also there. And archaeologists have also found the roots of civilization in India in Kurukshetra itself. There's a site called Birwana, where they have the origins of agriculture there, the oldest field, and origins of these ancient cities. And of course, we have evidence of fire altars. We have evidence of swastikas, people leaves, iconography, the Varaha avatar, the sacred bull. There's also significant evidence of horses. And the last evidence that has come, which is very important, is the genetic evidence. Professor Vasant Shinde and Neeraj Rai, among others, have been doing that. And what they've shown is that there's no intrinsic movement of genetic material into India. Rather, it's the same people that have been there the last 5,000 years or more, starting in Rakhigarhi. And we find evidence of Indian DNA in Iran and further west. And we also find not only the DNA of the people, but the DNA of the animals. For example, the Brahma bull, we find that's DNA in Italy and behind some of their breeds over 8,000 years ago. So essentially, we see India as a cradle of civilization. both materially and also spiritually through the Vedas. And while there is resistance to that, Europe wants to be the source of the civilization, etc. All the evidence is coming more in our favor. And the antiquity of Sanskrit is also being confirmed. It is the oldest of the Indo-European languages. Vedas are the origins of Sanskrit, and Vedas originate from Om, manifestation of Om. And if you read the Yoga Sutras, the Adi Guru of yoga is Ishvara, whose Vachaka, whose indicator is Pranava or Om. Om, Yoga, Vedas, all connected together. Now, in the Indian context, there has been this tendency to forget about the older Vedic text, even though they were the products of the rishis. Who are these rishis? They're the great seers throughout all of Indian culture and civilization. Vasishta, Vishwamitra, Vamadeva, Atri, Agastya, Kanwa, it's a whole range of them, and they became a lot of the Gotras throughout India. But the tendency was then to look at the Rig Veda, which is the basic Vedic text, mainly in terms of the ritual, because the texts were used for ritual or yajna, and some said, oh, Karma Kanda is the Vedic text, Jnana Kanda, way of knowledge, is Upanishad. And Sri Aurobindo, of course, challenged that. And here I'll make a very simple point. There are a few hymns and verses from Rig Veda that have been interpreted in the highest light. For example, Gayatri Mantra, which came from the third mandala of Vishwamitra, and the Mrityunjaya Mantra, which came from the seventh mandala of Vasishta. But there are 10,000 verses like that in Rig Veda. And as Sri Aurobindo has noted, and I can also say, you can find among these as many mantras equal to Gayatri or Mrityunjaya mantra. And Vedas reflect the inner meaning, deeper teachings, but there are 4 levels or 7 levels of the Vedic Vak, and we have to understand symbolic language and mantra. And Sri Aurobindo was able to do that. In fact, Vedas say if you don't know Vak, you cannot understand the Vedas. And if you don't know the secret meaning of Vak, of course, you can't go anywhere with the Vedas. So we view the Vedas also as a book of knowledge. And yajna is twofold. It's antar yaga and bahar yaga. Bahar yaga is the outer sacrifice, which is made with material offerings. I'm not going to downplay it at all. It is a kind of enactment of the inner yajna. Yoga is the antar yaga. You can find this explained in the 4th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. You can find it mentioned in the Mahabharata. Every deity in Vedas has a meaning in terms of the outer yajna and the inner yajna. Take Agni. Agni within us is the flame of awareness, Chidagni, the flame of aspiration, the flame in the heart, the Jivatma. All these are connected to Agni. In fact, all the Vedic deities are connected not simply to yoga and the yajna, but to every aspect of knowledge. In Ayurveda, we work with understanding the Jataragni, the digestive fire, as the basis of health. In Ayurveda and yoga, we learn how to work with the Pranagni, the Agni of prana and its purifying power. Among the senses, Agni is the eye. And in the inner eye, of course, Agni is the third eye. The buddhi, the discerning faculty, is the Agni in the chitta. And we have Agni as Ananda. We have Chidagni. You know, the very famous Lalita Sahasranama starts near the beginning. Chidagni Kunda Sambhuta, born of the altar of the flame of consciousness. And many of Hindus and even yoga people do this Brahmagni mantra for eating food. But Brahmagni is also the Agni of Sat and Satchit Ananda. So Sri Aurobindo has opened up that Vedic symbolism and Vedic expression. And I also want to say he's created an entire school that has come out of his work, notably Kapali Shastri, who did 120 suktas of the Rig Veda in his translation of the Rig Veda. And also, Kapali Shastri was a disciple of Kavyakanta Ganapati Muni as well, who was the chief disciple of Ramana Maharshi. And Kavyakanta also did a tremendous study on the Vedas, and he shared these with the mother at the Aurobindo ashram, and also with Sri Aurobindo. And Kapali Shastri, then that school has continued, MP Pandit, Jagan Mohan, and R.L. Kashyap, who has done a whole new complete translation of the Rig Veda. And another very great yogi connected to Sri Aurobindo is Sri Anirvan. He did Sri Aurobindo's work in Bengali and also was close to Aurobindo. And he did a very great Veda Mimamsa, which goes into great detail and Vedic meanings of Upanishads and so forth. And so there's a whole Vedic school of esoteric interpretation connected to Sri Aurobindo directly or indirectly. Another famous yogi who passed away a few years ago was Swami Veda Bharati. It was in Rishikesh there at the Swami Rama Sadhaka Gram. So that school has continued, and all the research Sri Aurobindo has done has, of course, continued. And he explained all the devatas. And I've already mentioned Agni. I don't want to take, of course, too much time here. Soma is also the Ananda. And these forces connect with the ancient yogas as well. Agnis can connect it in the Sri Vidya tradition, the Tantric tradition with Kundalini Shakti. That's arising as a force of Pranagni, the fire that dwells in the Muladhara. Soma is connected, called the Sahasrar, or the crown chakra, the flow of Soma, the flow of Samadhi, the flow of Ananda. Indra, as Sri Aurobindo also notes, is connected to the Vayu, or the Vata force, the transformative energy, the higher discerning mind. And of course, Surya, as the power of the sun, as the solar force. Surya is Atma in the Vedas, and connected to the supramental vision. Surya combines all the devatas. Agni, Soma, Vayu are also aspects or manifestations of Surya. So all of these things have been explored. There's also the great Adityas, the Maruts, Ushas, Brahaspati, and you'll find in the Secret of the Veda, all these have been explained in great detail. So it's very important that the Renaissance in India civilizationally and historically is connected to the Vedas and Sri Aurobindo, and also the connections with the yoga and the interpretation of the Vedas, and reclaiming the Vedic heritage in India and also globally. Basically, again, recognizing that the rishis still live within us. Agni dwells at the core of our hearts. Surya is the supreme cosmic reality. All of cosmology is explained in the Vedas. So we do need an institution of Vedic studies in the Sri Aurobindo area, Auroville, Pondicherry, that also connects us globally. So I'm very happy that Dr. Ravi has brought that up. And introducing a deeper study of the Vedas, there is the technicality of Vedic chanting, usually Krishna Yajurveda chantings done in South India. Sanatani in the North is a little bit different, but also understanding the devatas within us, the deities, understanding the rishis within us. Even Upanishads say the 7 rishis are the 7 openings in the head, and understanding the connection between the Vedas and all of later spirituality. And here I want to mention a connection. You know, Upanishads always talk about Vedas as the teachings of the rishis and the sages overall. And we have the great Mahavakyas of the Vedas. And most important is Aham Brahmasmi in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad of Yajnavalkya. And when Yajnavalkya mentions that, he also says, this is what the Rishi Vamadeva saw in the Rig Veda. Rishi Vamadeva said, Aham manur abhavam suryascha. I am Manu. Manu here is not just the first human being. Manu is the cosmic Purusha, the Atma. And I am the sun Surya. Surya is not just the sun in the sky. Surya is also the supreme Atma. Surya is the light of the supramental force that takes us there. And so we see there was never this sense that the Vedas should be forgotten. And you'll notice that when the commentators on Upanishads interpret that verse, they interpret Vamadeva's statement as Paramatma. When they interpret the Gayatri mantra in some other context, it's about Paramatma, and yet they have forgotten so many other verses there as well. And we can find many correlations there. In the Aitareya Upanishad, Indra is Purusha. In the Taittiriya, Indra is Chandasam Vrishabha, is Om. In the Upanishadic visions, Upanishads are the Guhya, the secret knowledge, which is the Vedas. And what's extraordinary about Sri Aurobindo's vision, it was not just the vision of the Vedas relative to the past, but the Vedas relative to the future, and also the call for new Vedas and new rishis. So it is my hope and my aspiration that Pondicherry, Auroville also become the cradle, the foundation of new rishis and new Vedas by connecting back to that power of Vak, Chit Shakti, by the deeper teachings that Sri Aurobindo and the Mother have shared with us, and by the ability also to take that Vak Shakti even into the English language, as he has done in Savitri, and to awaken that mantric power within us, to awaken the Agni within us, so we can manifest all the devatas. And Agni is the primordial rishi also. And it is that very Agni within us that grows, expands, manifests all the deities, and becomes the supreme power of Surya. So we have a Vedic past of 10,000 years. We also have a Vedic future that is unlimited. And this Vedic vision has spread very far. One of the things I did some years ago is I helped the Swaminarayan Akshardham in Delhi. We put together a book on ancient India, Hidden Horizons, and they did a whole 20-minute boat ride down the Saraswati River explaining this. So here I want to close and say Sri Aurobindo is, to me, the real inspiration of India for the past and the future. I don't want to say anything against Mahatma Gandhi, but I would feel that Sri Aurobindo is more the spiritual father and to some extent even the Kshatriya father of modern India. And he's also taken this vision to the world, and this Vedas are central to that, but Vedas has taken forward into a cosmic vision and understanding of all the secrets of science, spirituality, and yoga are there. So with these words, I will end my talk. There are so many things that can be gone into on many levels. I do hope there are more opportunities for that. And there are many at the ashram also working on these issues, like Sampadananda Mishra, and again, Kashyap. So let us share in the Vedic vision as the Sri Aurobindo vision, the vision of India, this 75th, 150th anniversary. Let us light that Vedic fire, and let us have that Vedic vision for all time, all space, all lokas, and a new supramental humanity. Namaste, Shri Gurubhyo Namaha, Hari Om Tat Sat.
Thank you, Dr. David Frawley, for this very inspiring and detailed contribution. And I will straight over hand to Dr. Alok Pandey for his input.
Namaste. There are three ways of looking at Veda. The word itself means knowledge, but of course it's not the knowledge of the usual kind, not the knowledge which we get from the senses through the mental analysis. And that's why it's a secret knowledge. This knowledge comes when we transcend the senses and the mind through the path of yoga, as is indicated in the Veda itself. So one way to look at Veda is the secret knowledge which is hidden in creation. Behind everything, it's the secret knowledge masked as ignorance, as Aurobindo puts in Savitri. So this knowledge is implicit everywhere. At one place in Savitri, Aurobindo speaks of Satyavan as the Veda, knower of the unwritten book. So one way to look at Veda is a set of books, but another way is that Veda, the secret knowledge, is there within creation, in the heart of every atom. And through the yoga that is revealed there, this knowledge can get revealed to us. And what that means is nothing less than a transformation of not only our in-look, our outlook, and a much greater empowerment and wisdom with regard to dealing with the world. Because this knowledge is not just a set of, as I said, books, hymns, but a wisdom. So Vedas are enshrining, the Veda, the book is enshrining a little bit of this wisdom. And this wisdom is there in creation. And if we look at the working of an atom, if we look at the working of a cell, if we look at the shock of a star, if we look at the meteor shower, if we look at the way a rose blooms, if we look at the way the planets are spinning around, in everything, every aspect of material creation, it's a detailed study, more than a study, a revelation. We will find this secret knowledge. And that's why those whose eyes are open, they can actually discover this knowledge just passing through in the babble of a child, in just observing commonplace events. So that is one way to understand the Veda, that the Veda is the secret knowledge, the wisdom which is in creation, Pragya Prasato Purano, the ancient of the days, the wisdom that has gone forth into creation. The second way of looking at Veda is, as Aurobindo puts it in the 4/8 in the Synthesis of Yoga, the supreme Shastra. So again, Shastra is outside and Shastra is within us. The supreme Shastra, the eternal Veda, the supreme Shastra of the integral yoga is the eternal Veda. Where is it? The eternal Veda, secret in the heart of every living and thinking creature. So it is there within our heart. So one is it's implicit in creation. But how do we access that knowledge? One way is science going outward. Another way is to discover this source of knowledge within us, in the heart. And that's why in the Vedic lore it is said that knowing which all else can be known. Yasmin vigyate vigyati sarvam. That by knowing which all can be known. So Veda is not just, obviously not just an intellectual knowledge that's understood, but it's not just a knowledge of a supracosmic transcendental state. It's a knowledge which reveals to us the workings of the cosmos, the creation, the human body, this instrumentality within time and space, the manifestation of the divine through time and space and all the objects. So this, to access this knowledge, the route we have to take is within, and from within it spreads out, branches out outwards into the whole universe. and how this bud opens, that too Aurobindo describes very beautifully in the synthesis. And the third, of course, which is the way we commonly understand the Vedas, is that there are a set of books and wonderful books, of course, and that's a different subject. The three books, the Rig, the Yajur, the Sam, and then comes Atharved. And of course, people include the Ayurveda also as a kind of Vedic lore. And then, yes, the Mahabharata is the fifth Veda. And I would say the Savitri, the Veda of the future. And many, many other scriptures, written and unwritten, which have shaped the spiritual knowledge and which have kept the spiritual thirst of mankind alive. So all that can be a larger way of looking at Veda as a vast body of spiritual literature. The first mention of which we find in what today has come down to us as the Rig Veda, Yajur Veda, the Sam Veda, and the Athar Veda, little later in time. The beauty is that the Vedic lore itself speaks about the forefathers who were before them. So Vedas are a document of the most profound spiritual experience and realizations. And surely, as the mother says at one place, they were not just ordinary beings. They were involutionary beings who came to this soil of earth to seed it with seeds of light. So we find in Vedas the key thoughts that will govern mankind for ages to come. Because these seeds were seeded by involutionary beings. And what is meant by that is, the beings of the higher states of consciousness, higher domains, who took a human body and at the impulsion of an inner command, they gave these truths to mankind. And why they are regarded as sacred, or why they are regarded as the profound truth, Aurobindo says in one of his aphorisms very beautifully, not because it is there in a sacred book or because somebody uttered it, but because the soul saw it. Meaning that by the ultimate evidence, we go back to the soul vision. And these rishis had the soul vision, and thereby the truths that they revealed may not be immediately accessible to the mind, but if we follow the trail, the Vedas begin to disclose themselves also within us. So the Vedic lore, as we understand today, is the document, but the quest, the mystic quest, goes on even before that. The mother speaks of a civilization even before the Vedic and the Chaldean, and the Vedic rishis themselves speak about the forefathers. So it's a quest which is coming since time immemorial, and I think man is characterized by this quest, because a human being who doesn't have this aspiration or is seeking, I would rather put it in a different way, that human beings are marked by this seeking. And the moment this seeking comes, the book of the Veda begins to open within us. So what essentially is this Vedic lore? The Vedic lore, first and foremost, is that there is one omnipresent, omniscient reality. So dig it any which way, go into the depths of the matter, you will reach a point where you will end up with behind the forms, phenomena, we will encounter energy, go through different levels of the energy, you will enter into consciousness and go back to it, you will get the source. So ultimately, there is one reality which stands to logic also, that there cannot be two, three, multiple, creative origins of this creation. So there is one origin, and which brings home this point which we often miss, that this entire universe is interconnected. Today we are learning it in strange ways, but essentially why they are interconnected? Because there is one origin. And since there is one origin, it is there within everything. So anything, if we go to its heart, you will discover the Vedas. You will discover that origin. But going out into an object and discovering it is far more difficult than going within and discovering it, because here we are dealing with subjective layers, whereas when we go outside, there are objective layers which are not easily accessible to the human vision. Of course, in the highest sense, the subjective and objective fuse together, and we can say with equal truth that all is at its bottom subjective. We can equally say that this world which we regard as objective is nothing but an objectivization of the supreme subject, the divine himself. So there are ways of looking at it. But the first truth is that there is one fundamental reality. And if mankind could understand that we all have one origin, not just material origin, which of course is the inverse way of looking at it, but a common spiritual origin, I think much of the fights and struggles that we are facing will automatically get solved. So Vedas, if we look at it that way, is the solution to the problem that mankind is facing of various kinds of division. So you see, every religion speaks of one God, but it ends up with the God of my religion. And that's where the problem comes, putting it very squarely. But what do the Vedas say? There is one God, but he has many, many, many aspects. So these many aspects become the gods and the goddesses. So this is something very wonderful, because very often people say, oh, why there are so many gods and goddesses in the Sanatana Dharma? It's a great strength. So, meaning thereby, you see, when we don't have the gods and goddesses, we are cutting off that one from the cosmos. So we can look at gods and goddesses as aspects of the one, and they are cosmic managers, to put it in more modern terms. How do you link the one with this world? And that's why we see that religions which did away with the gods, you can't do away because they exist, they are a reality. Whether we believe or not, it doesn't make a difference. So they are there. It's like when you send an application, finally it comes with the Prime Minister's seal, or whoever is the immediate officer. It has passed through many hands. That's the channel. So the gods are there as cosmic deities, and they are the ones who manage this cosmos in its multiple details. So they are at once deities of the physical world, because the physical world also has processes, laws, order. Imagine if Agni, the physical Agni, I'm not talking of the inner Agni, if it overshoots its function, what's going to happen? Imagine the waters, if they overshoot. So there are gods who are behind these cosmic forces or manifestations at a physical level. And one may think that this is superstition. On the contrary, this is one of the most profoundest way of managing life. See, when the rains would come sometimes in the sports ground, and particularly we know about Golkund, that at one point the rains were not, people wanted the rains to be stalled by some time. They went to the mother, and the mother concentrated, and the rains were stalled, and they came. The sky was, overcome by clouds, and the rains came just when they needed it, when the lintel was placed. So it gives us ways and means of manipulating. Manipulating is the wrong word, but dealing with the world directly by going to the knot of energy on that being through which the supreme consciousness is flowing into it. So we see in the Ramayana, for instance, that they pray to Samudra, or they pray to the sun god. When people complain that in Pondicherry it's so hot, mother, the sun is very bright, a bit too bright for us. So what do? And mother said, make friends with the sun. It's a very profound statement. So it was a way of dealing with the entire creation, which weaved in the sense of the sacred in everything. So it's a wonderful thing to know that, a river, not to believe, but to know that a river is a deity, and the sun is a deity, and the moon is a deity, and the stars are a deity, and this entire physical universe, the earth and everything else, the mountains, they are a deity. And this kind of a culture exists within India. And there are, paucity of time. Otherwise, I could go into several examples and how it helps. At least at a personal level, I have found it very helpful. I'll give just one example to regard these, how these gods are operating in the cosmos. So there is this story in Ramayana. So when Sushen Veda comes from Lanka, he's following the highest code of the physician that I have to treat. Doesn't matter, even if it be my enemy. So he asks Hanuman to bring Sanjeevani Mutti. And Hanuman brings Sanjeevani Mutti, and as Sugriva is ready to pick up and take it to Sushen Veda to apply it to Lakshmana, he says, hold on. This is what you have got is only the material aspect. So what has to be done? I have to invoke the healing deity which is within it. And therefore, through the mantras he invokes. And this mantra, which was a link between the material and the spiritual, is another very profound aspect of the Vedic lore. So how does the mantra become a link? Because creation starts with that stir. Out of space, that first element which comes, the sound element. So the highest manifestation of sound in creation is Vak, the word. And if you uplift speech to its highest level, it becomes creative. I mean, it has tremendous power. Sound has a power, this we all know. But this power can be manifested in human consciousness by lifting it to its highest possible expression, highest possible rhythm, because Vak is very, very rhythmic as we go upward and upward. Therefore, that Vak has the power to bring everything into harmony. To take another practical demonstration of this, that, when two people are, communicating with each other, and you see when they get angry, how the speech tends to become more and more disorderly. The breath becomes more and more chaotic. And when they have to build harmony, just let one person start speaking harmoniously, beautifully. There was a very nice video doing the rounds recently of husband and wife fighting, but in a very musical sing-song way. I don't know whether it really exists or not, but I do believe that if somebody could try it out, don't try it out, of course, but it will have a beautiful effect. When our speech becomes musical, rhythmic, not because we are trying to train it, but because it is connected with the Vak, which is above. So mantra was on one side a certain kind of hymn, but on other side, mantra was the power of the word. And in human beings, it is the spoken word, and behind it, the thought. So if we can lift it up to the highest level, highest possibility, that mantra becomes very powerful. It can act upon the physical phenomena. It can act upon inner psychological states, because they are two sides of one reality. So while the gods were at one level, deities who were governing the physical creation, they were also at one psychological deity. So this parallel truth was, they were not exclusive of each other, but they were working together. So the outer fire is there, and as very beautifully Vamdevji was referring to the fire as, the fire within. And to make it still more, see, even the words were so beautiful. Agni, Ag. Even now, today we use the word Age. That power that moves things forward, that energy in matter which takes the course upward and creates evolutionary forms for the manifestation of the Lord, the steps of the Shakti it creates. So this Agni, which was the first god invoked, because it is this which can make everything ascend, including this power of speech, to higher and higher levels. Without lighting the Agni, one doesn't invoke the mantra, because it's the Agni which must be lit. And once the Agni is lit, then the mantra and then the speech, and it ascends to, where does it ascend to? Indra. Now, who is Indra? It's very interesting. Agni is climbing from below. Light up even a physical fire, you'll see the fire is ascending up. And Indra is the lightnings that descend from above. So you'll see the god of lightning, that, he is the Vajra, and he sends lightning. So these lightnings are the intuitive rains. So on one side, there is the fire which is ascending upward. And on the other side is the rain of intuitive lightnings, inspirations. Thanks for that wonderful talk, Jayanti ji, where you mentioned these three, and out of the four goddesses, Ila, Saraswati, Dakshina, of course, and Mahi. So all these Sarma, these goddesses, which are like energies which come from above. So when the two meet, when the fire from within goes up, this fire of aspiration, and a point comes in the Antariksha when these forces from above descend, and where the two meet, there out of a human being, a divine possibility is born. And a human being becomes a demigod, a rishi, and all that. Until then, he is still covered with the cloak of ignorance. So this was the journey of the soul from its state of ignorance towards greater and greater possibilities. And this journey also followed certain steps. The steps through which the involution took place, the story in Rig Veda of the Brahmajaya, the bride of Brahman who wanders away from Brahman into the inconscient, and all the gods go to bring her back. And the first god is Soma. So the whole journey, regardless of all our ups and downs, remains deep within. There is a thread of joy, a delight, which is running through the journey, which helps us to live and ascend and labor. And so this energy takes the form of a joyous progress. The same energy, Ag, all energy that makes us move forward, gives us an impulsion forward, is the power of Agni. And then the journey starts, and this is to go through a graded process. So we have these many tired words. Again, in physics, we can explain it, try to understand it. Today, physics is speaking about string theory, superstring theory, and not going into it detail. But can we really explain the material cosmos only on the basis of material cosmos? This is a big question that, because if we do it, then we are trapped in a closed system. See, it's like the catch-22 situation. If you explain the material cosmos, everything on the basis of the material cosmos, then you're trapped in a closed system. And how do we explain the expansion, the evolution, and everything? And the moment we bring in the other dimensions, then we have how many dimensions? And there we see that the Vedas spoke of the 3 below and the 3 above and the linked dimension. And of course, we can keep on multiplying because each of these dimensions is threefold. So the physical is not just physical, there is life involved in it, making it, vital physical. Then there is the mind involved in it, making it the mental physical. So there is a mind in matter, mind as the cosmic agency, which is operating to, what does the mind do? It sections the infinite into finite. That's why at its highest, it becomes the overmind Maya that measures out. So within matter, it creates the sense of all separate things which are, whether we call them electrical charges or atoms, and they're all together weaving a wonderful dance. So there is the avidyamay Maya, which is constantly creating sections, and there is a vidyamay Maya, which is constantly joining them together in a state of oneness, and they are conscious beings and forces. So we see that it gives us a much greater empowerment to deal with life. Somebody who has become one with that vidyamay Maya, you see what a tremendous harmonizing influence such a person can have in life. And I think the ashram itself is a wonderful example. People from different places, different, all kinds of backgrounds have come. But in the mother, they were one. So, I always suggest that, just as a physical mother, always the mother state, like even in the mother India, we become one. In Aurobindo, if we concentrate on the divine, it's a divine mother's creation, then you see the oneness will come. The moment you say, no, it is something impersonal, and you will see that immediately each part begins to follow its own course. So this aspect of the divine mother as Aditi, the undivided consciousness, which you find in the Vedas, and Diti as she herself becomes this ignorance. And at first we are prepared through a state of ignorance, and there comes a time when the soul of man is ready to ascend through higher and higher states of consciousness. And that readiness of the soul, when it is ready to ascend, is what is called as the initiation in yoga, the Dvij, the second birth. So we always have two births. Actually, even otherwise, we have two double parentage. So we have the heaven, the Deus, and the earth, Prithvi. So earth forms a physical matter, and heavens form our soul. Heaven, of course, not the heaven, the way we understand today, but heaven in the sense of the highest luminous state. So we have come from that. So there is something in us always carrying the blueprint of the higher worlds. It is this that inspires our idealism, our idealistic thought. It is this that strives towards something beautiful, true, good, in spite of all the opposing appearances. And there is something in us which belongs to earth and earthly matter, and that tends to hold us back. And between the two, we have this wonderful manifold rainbow universe, as Aurobindo describes, a tree beside the sandy river, which holding its topmost boughs to heaven like fingers, like branches, like fingers to the heaven they cannot reach. Such is the soul of man, his body and brain hungry for earth, his heavenly flight detained. So there is within us a celestial tongue of fire, like a prayer mounting towards heaven. And there is something else which holds back. Why it holds back? Because this says, please take me along. So this idea that later on developed out of Veda by purely extracting the Gyan Kand and turning it into an Upanishadic lore and a meditative practice, it missed the real point. So Vedas are at once inner realities, the Gyan Kand and the Karma Kand. It weaves every aspect. If you see the Vedic life, everything, marriage, birth, everything was a sacerdocy. Everything was sacred. And we have grown up with that. We have seen from childhood till the tomb and later on. Everything was sacred. And why it was sacred? Because that's how in everything there is this eternal truth which is wanting to manifest itself. Every marriage was supposedly supposed to be a marriage of Shiva and Parvati. That's why the marriages start after that. Unfortunately, it turns into Shiva and Sati, where one of them has to give herself to the fire. This fire ceremony itself in the center in a marriage is man, not you, woman, not you, nor your parents, but the common fire of aspiration is the center of your union. And if you can take it like in any group life, if we take the common ideal, bring it back to that common ideal, in a common uplifting ideal, maybe unite. See that famous sloka of the among the Agni mantras, that Sangachatam, Samvadatam, let us come together, let us utter the mantra together, let us join together in that fire of aspiration, let us ascend together. So this is the human march, both individually and collectively. And then this march is no easy journey. All the forces of darkness they oppose. So they were the helpers in the journey, the gods, the cosmic deities. Whether we regard them or not, it doesn't matter. Every word we utter, there is behind it the power of inspiration. It enters through the brain and the brain thinks it is me. After all, how do thoughts form? But that's a science in itself. So when we look at it, it enters the brain, it changes into the mint of analysis because we can't accept it. And eventually it expresses itself in a very analytical sort of way because that's our limitation. But it can come directly as a received knowledge from above and block if we make the mind transmute through the offering of the beautifully, as it was said, clarified butter, the intelligence. Butter is that snigdha, that luminous intelligence. When we put it into the fire, then the fire comes higher and higher. But on the other hand, if you put smoke and all the impurities, the fire has to first burn it. So there were these dasyus, the natural enemies of the soul. So Kama, Krodha, Lobha, Moha, Mad, Matsar, all these six, and the mother adds to them the seventh, fear. All of them oppose the march. Why do they oppose the march? Precisely so that the soul may grow in wisdom and strength. It has to reclaim its father's kingdom. That's what Bible says, the Son of God. The Son and the Father are equal and one. Soham asmi. That's what it means, Tattvamasi. But put in a biblical term, it means that the Son is equal to the Father, is as the Father. He has come from the Father and he must become the Father. That's the human journey. And the opposition itself is a grand plan, because through opposition we grow in strength and wisdom. Would we arrive at the cup of immortality, which is the goal of the Vedas, by simply, is it a cup to be given in the hands of the weaklings? So we will have multiple oppositions, countless oppositions. We are helpers on the way, both subtle agencies and human agencies, both. And similarly, we have subtle opposing powers whose names are Valas, Panis, etc., which unfortunately, thanks for that, was unfortunately turned into an Aryan-Dravidian divide, which of course is not true now. The world more or less knows it, but politics keeps it simmering. So this is the journey of man from the lower firmament to the higher. Rhodesia, the heavens beyond, and how our life moves between these two oceans, the ocean of superconscient above and the aprakritim salilam, the lower inconscient ocean. So the moment we read it, it gives such a new sense to life. People often ask, what's my aim? And by aim, they think job. Well, our aim is the original impulsion, and our aim can be nothing else but to become divine. And when we speak of this become divine in the Vedic sense, it's not divine in some transcendent abstract and have moksha. But first, get rid of ignorance, the moksha, and then manifest the divine in each and every part of our being. All the gods of the Vedas are there to help us. The nerves, the twastris who fashion the chariot, the flamings which course through the nerves, the ashwins who help heal us from within. It can open a whole way of understanding the whole healing process. There are deities which are waiting to help us when we take the upper journey. When we don't take that journey, then we are under the siege. Our fortress of life is under the siege of the dasyus, and they rob what we receive and change it into and put it into the subconscious. So that has to be taken out. There are a lot of, let's say, beautiful things. People experience this in life. This is just one example, and then we can stop. So many things as children we pick up, and we have a glimpse on a mountain, something beautiful which opens a door, as beautifully Vamdeji was describing that he was on a journey from Canada to US and he felt successive dawns. Now these openings, everybody experiences these openings, but what happens? They get buried into the subconscious because everybody is not so fortunate or so developed, but they go into the subconscious of man. Now, this is the story of the Dasyu stealing the cows and tying it into the caves. And it is Sarma, the goddess of intuition, which shows us there. And we are led into that darkness to extract that light which is hidden in the caves. So it gives a new meaning to Asado ma sadgamya, tamso ma jyotirgamya, mrityor ma amritam gamya. So one is out of the non-being to the true being, out of death to immortality, out of darkness to light. And the other is to take out the light which is hidden in darkness. And that is how we understand the Vedic lore of Martand, the 8th Aditya, who is buried inside. So there is light hidden in this darkness. So the Vedic lore was not about leaving this realm and going there. Going there was only a prelude. The whole journey was not finishing there. The journey had to be brought back, that sun, that light, and it had to come back and bring out that light which is hidden in the subconscious, so that joining these two poles, we can make heaven and earth equal and one. So I suppose, so much I want to go into, but we'll close with these lines from Savitri, which directly connect us with the Vedic lore. So Vedas, I look at it like a project. One is that if you take it as a book, then of course there are certain number of slokas and it's fixed there. But if you take it as the eternal Veda, which is the infinite truth unfolding within us, then Veda can never be finished in terms of a book, because there'll be unending revelations which are yet to come. So the seed that is cast in the Vedas goes through the different cycles, ages. They prepare. So beautifully, Aurobindo says in Savitri, a word is spoken, the ages toil to express. And eventually, with this supramental manifestation, we'll awaken to an age, to a race where not just individual rishis, but large masses of mankind will wake up to this truth, the satyam, the right, the rhythm, and the vast, the vrihatam. Because see how beautifully truth. Nowadays, people often say, oh, God is in everyone. Yes, but complement it with other truth, that God is in everyone, but manifests himself in different degrees, in different layers of humanity. God is even in the snake, but if you want to pick a cobra and put around your neck, be sure you are Shiva. Otherwise, you will be a dead man. So to understand God in the essence and God in the manifestation in his Leela, both are important. And this ascension comes through sacrifice. And that is where the sacrifice is of the lower for higher, lower for higher. What is today higher will become lower, because you have to go further. What is today higher will become lower, because we have to ascend higher and higher. So this Agni will carry us. Otherwise, if we are satisfied that, okay, we have some nice inspirations and wonderful time to time I have intuitions, no, that's not enough. It has to keep on going till we discover that point where Aurobindo says, God and world grow true and one. So we have these lines, the supreme, the soul's choice and the supreme consummation on page 704. Adventurers into a mightier day, ascending out of the limiting breaths of mind, they shall discover the world's huge design and step into the truth, the right, the vast. And then, of course, he says that there is a consciousness the mind cannot touch. And it is this where we have to reach. Yes. Which, of course, is there in the Vedas in its beautiful way. The swar of the rishis, which is the heaven of the rays of the sun. And the Maharlok, where they are aspiring to go. They could see it from there. This is still greater. And they want to go there. But it is covered. Hiranmayena patrena satyasyapi hitam mukha. He wants that law of truth. We govern our life by different laws and rules. But that law of truth, what is the original divine impulsion? Now, that prayer of Rishi Yagnavalkar, has been answered, because the face of truth has been opened, and the luminous waters of the golden waters of the greater dawn are pouring upon earth. And here Aurobindo says, with which I'll pause, 705 page, there is a consciousness mind cannot reach. Its speech cannot utter, nor its thought reveal. Right now, the Vak has not been tuned to that expression. It has no home on earth. The human body doesn't have a center. The brain must first receive it. And centers must form within to hold this supramental light. And then the expressive power. Yet is the source of all things thought and done, the fount of the creation and its works. It is the origin of all truth here, knowing which all can be known. This sun orb of mind's fragmentary rays, infinity's heaven that spills the rain of God, the immense that calls to man to expand the spirit, the wide aim that justifies his narrow attempts, a channel for the little he tastes of bliss. So Soma is the God who goes in the beginning, and Soma is the God who is retrieved at the end. So that's why we have, very beautifully, as was said, we have Varuna and Mitra, and we have Ariman who must battle, and then we have Bhagda, Ananda. And Sri Aurobindo in the Synthesis of Yoga, he speaks of these four aims this way: Shuddhi, Shuddhi, Mukti. Purification from the ignorance of lower nature. So we are liberated. We discover that who we are, the soul within. So Shuddhi leads to Mukti. After all, it is just a covering. The soul within is in everyone, but it's covered. So purify that layer through the fire, the yagna, the sacrifice, and one arrives at Mukti, which is freedom from that ignorance which is covering us. And then comes Siddhi. Now, once the soul is free, it must ascend towards a divine perfection. So Sri Aurobindo takes the goal of the Vedic rishis, which was primarily immortality. Of course, by immortality, it was not just about physical immortality, but immortality of the soul, immortality of the vast infinite. And there are touches where they talk about the physical, but that's a different aspect altogether. It was never really developed. And then after Siddhi, that perfection, we have Bhukti, the divine enjoyment of creation. So this world is made for delight and not for escaping into some kind of inane. And it's important to emphasize this, because invariably what we see in many of the Vedantic schools, ultimately, at the end of the day, it's all inner within. But this inner to empower us for the outer. These were the mighty examples of great yogins: Bhishma, Arjuna, Sri Krishna himself, Sri Aurobindo, the mother. They had realized this and had tremendous power over the world. Just imagine that they were conducting the Second World War from a room, just as Sri Krishna on the battlefield, on the chariot, unarmed, and yet he was the one who was conducting the entire war. Such is the future towards which Sri Aurobindo and the mother are leading us through the supramental manifestation, fulfilling the dream that the Vedic seers saw, and leading those seeds sown in the early dawns of humanity toward the grand culmination of the noons of the future. Namaste.
Thank you, Dr. Pandey, for this very inspiring contribution. We have many questions. I would like to maybe answer to one already. Several people have asked regarding the invitation of Dr. Jayanti Ravi to support or help or come to Auroville. What will be the best way to contact us? We have actually an email address that Radhe will post in the chat, which is comingtogether@auroville.org.in. You can write there, and we will respond to you and see how best we can guide you toward what might interest you in Auroville. Then you might have seen also on your screen that we have other panelists present. So we have Luca Ravindra from the Auroville Spiritual Multiversity Group. Anu also from Auroville is there, and HP Rama from La Grace. So if one of you has a question or a comment for our panelist, Dr. Foley or Dr. Pandey, please feel free to share, and then we'll see if we have some time for the question of the audience. Numerous questions from the audience are already listed.
Namaste, everyone. I would like to convey my thanks to Dr. Vamadeva and Dr. Alok Pandey for accepting this invitation. And honestly speaking, after this session, before this session, I had a few questions on the subject, but almost all the questions has been answered during this session. And again, I would really love to, convey my gratitude for having this, uplifting beginning of this webinar, and surely looking forward to have many more sessions with you. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Ravindra. Anyone else as a panelist would like to comment or ask a question, or shall I go for the question from the audience? You have to unmute yourself, Luca. Luca?
Yes. First of all, I thank you very much for all your time that has brought you to clarify and illuminate a little bit our audience. And what I would like eventually is not a question, but a request. If you could actually clarify a little bit or expand a little bit about the yogic process involved in this book. And the indication I can go, we can read in this book about a yogic, if there is an advice, if there is a path through mantra or through invocation, some little bit of explanation, a little bit of expansion on this message that eventually is in this secret aspect describing on our text.
So, so there are three aspects of as far as the yoga in the Vedas is concerned. There is the yajna, there is the mantra, and there is the devata or the deity. So if we universalize it, not exactly following exactly how the specific mantra and things are concerned, then yajna means to light the fire of aspiration, in which we offer every tendency. I mean, the Gita has revealed it so beautifully in chapter 4 and chapter 6 and furthermore, that light this fire of aspiration. And this aspiration by its very nature is to seek something which is higher, truer, more beautiful. It can take any form, but give it a form. And to offer all we do and all we are into it. So when we do it with the help of the mantra. So this mantra, of course, one way to look at it is the traditional mantras which are there in the Vedas, and they are very powerful. They are universal mantras. They've been practiced by yogis over the years. But this mantra can also be a universal power of the word, like a word like Om. Now, this word has been used over millenniums, and so it has gathered a power through which, when we offer it, for instance, we are eating a food, and with this aspiration within that, this is an inner process. Of course, we don't have to make it loud, but through that inner process, when we are making the act of eating, we are offering it to the universal and the transcendent divine within. So by doing it, we are linking our ephemeral, transient existence to the eternal and the permanent, so that it can receive that touch. Or we can do it by any line, like personally, I prefer the word Ma. So there is something like the divine name. So the divine name becomes the mantra, and the embodied divine becomes the deity. So that's why I said, instead of confining to the gods, which was wonderful in the Vedas itself, we see this later on, the Upanishads speak about, directly connecting with the Supreme. So any name, any word, if we take the conception of the Gita, so any word, any name, which for us represents the divine. So for somebody, it could be Shiva. That's why we have multiplicity of approaches. To somebody else, Hari. To someone, it could be Om Namo Bhagavate. To another person, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. To another person, Shri Arvinda Sharanam Mama. Or it could be an English mantra, a line from Savitri. So whatever way, but the mantra is essentially, it sets into motion those higher, the vibrations and rhythms of the higher world. This is what I was, referring to. So when we do it, then automatically all that we are offering in is surrounded by that vibration and uplifted above. So there comes to the aid of Agni, the mantra. And then, of course, we have the deities. So in the Vedas, of course, pantheon, we have the deities. These deities underwent many modifications down the ages. For instance, Indra of the Vedas, in the Puranas, we see him take a different position, and Vishnu and his triple steps in the Vedas becomes another aspect. So that need not be strictly the physical image as we have conceived. In fact, in the Vedas, we see that the physical images have come much later. So for us, it should be that deity which represents to us the absolute divine. So for instance, for the devotees of the mother and Sri Aurobindo, it becomes the mother, the embodied mother, or Sri Aurobindo. For somebody else who is following, so Guru becomes Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu, Guru Deva Maheshwara. So these are the three main things. There is the sacrificial fire, which means one is willing to sacrifice the lower for the higher. So if one is not ready to do it, then it's, no point in engaging in yoga. And this fire has to be activated more and more through the act of offering. And when the offering is done with the mantra, the right mantra, now it is in that right state of consciousness. It's not like one is doing it mechanically eating, but one is offering with the right mantra. Mantra creates a state of consciousness that is conducive. Not like just watching TV and doing things. So when we do that, then this fire is energized and lifts the offering up and up. And then, of course, we have the deity. So these are the fundamental three things which we find in the Vedic yoga as such. And then there are a lot of details in every sphere of life, but these are the three fundamental things.
Thank you very much. I thought it was nicely explained.
Okay, shall I continue with some questions from the audience? So please, Dr. Pandey and Dr. Froley, let me know when the time is up also. Feel free, and then we will wrap up the webinar if you are a bit short of time. So I have a question from Arpan Kumar Pasak. Why does the West hesitate or avoid to acknowledge the incredible contribution of ancient India to science? Who would like to?
I can address that. First of all, you have to understand that in the West, we've had a civilization that's just developed over the past few hundred years. And it has developed by going against or departing from some of the older cultures. And each culture likes to, you might say, define civilization in its own way. Now, in the West, science has been the outer science, not the inner science. And so the cultures that had developed the inner science, it's not willing to or able to acknowledge. At the same time, India developed both. And some of this knowledge came through, the British picked up some, the Persians, the Arabs, etc., picked up things over time. So they were kind of buried in history. It's also part of, you might say, a cultural superiority and kind of looking that we own and we control. So the Vedic view is larger. The outer sciences and the inner sciences are both acknowledged, but the inner science alone brings, as they say, immortality. The outer sciences are for the practical world. So the Western science is now beginning to get a glimpse of cosmology, universal consciousness there. They're beginning to recognize meditation can improve how the brain works, Sanskrit can improve how the brain works. But their idea of the human being is not Panchakosha, it's not Atma. It is still the physical being, brain chemistry, outer things, and name, form, and number measurements externally rather than the internal knowing. And also, as I said, most of these books on the origins of science began in the colonial era. And in the colonial era, there was a downsizing and rejection of Indian civilization, even though some Westerners, whether some of the intellectuals, even from Voltaire to Schopenhauer, accepted the antiquity of the depth of Indian civilization, there was that colonial view and expropriation of these things. So you'll notice the economy of India went from 20% of the world down to less than 1% under the British. Literacy went down in India. Sanskrit schools were closed, all of that. So that has created a certain ignorance and arrogance. And only today is there a recognition. And the other problem that India's had is that a lot of the intellectuals after independence went to the Marxist route, which was also against India's own culture and civilization. So when they wrote history books, they followed a Marxist Western line rather than an Indian line that honored the teachings, the Shastras, and the sciences. They tried to turn Ayurveda into something primitive. So these processes have gone on. And today it's important that India claims its outer sciences as the inner sciences are also spreading globally. Hari Om.
I would also suggest that there is a very nice short essay in Aurobindo's Bengali writings called East and West. So it shows the two approaches which lead to this, one is a Dehatma Bodh, where one is turned outward and regards the body and the vital as the true self, and the other is inward turned, which regards the soul and the spiritual as the real thing. So, of course, now they have to come together for the great fulfillment. But that has led to this complete misunderstanding about, mutual. Yeah. So this is a nice essay, worth reading, short essay in Bengali writings.
Thank you. So now we group 2 question of Jyoti Prasad Rajan. Why Vedic gods are not worshipped any longer? If we go by this trend, do you think the existing gods of overmind will be superseded? If Shri Krishna and the like are from the overmind, what would be the level of consciousness for the Vedic gods? I guess maybe the concept of overmind needs to be explained.
Yes, so the mother did mention that, the age of the gods is over. That doesn't mean that we have done away with them. They are facts and, cosmic deities. So man, once he makes the ascension, and it's very easy to understand. So gods are deities who stand at the overmind level, the Swarlok and, around that area, and they come down to less and lesser. Now they are assisting the human soul to ascend. Now, this human soul, when it ascends to, let's say, the Swarlok, then what is the relation of man with the gods? It changes into a friends. So I take it like this, that a child who is studying through a school has a teacher, and teacher in kindergarten, teacher in primary, secondary, and, higher secondary and college. But when the child graduates and goes further for further studies, what is the relation of the child and the teacher? At one level, he respects the teacher. But another level, it's equally true that one has gone beyond. So the relation changes of the gods as those who are helping mankind to grow to one of a friend, a those who assist in the same labor, who are undertaking the labor of the gods. One can be like a demigod. And that's what is meant by many of these Puranic lore that, Dashratha fought in the Devasur Sangram, many earthly beings from the side of the gods. So how are they fighting? Of course, we can take many levels of its understanding, but man can grow into a god. So this is the great gift of the Vedas, that we can grow into oneness and likeness of the god. That's what we see also in the Mahabharata. Many of these people are. But now from a man growing into the level of a god, if I have to use a Sanskrit term, we can become Devamanav. But from Devamanav, the next step, the supramental, is Divyamanav. So that is something which, is not yet accessible to the god. The gods have to take a human form to become a Divyamanav. There is a line in Savitri, a god come down and greater by the fall. So man at a level needed the gods to assist to reach a point. But beyond it, Devamanav, he can become a godlike human being. But to become a divine humanity of the future, he has to go beyond. So those who are ready, it's for them that we see the supramental manifestation brings a new possibility. It's not something which, can be generalized in anyone and everyone. As to whether human beings believe in gods or not, that's a different story altogether. Human beings always believe in gods, but in a different way. When we say, I believe in democracy, now what really you are believing? Behind democracy, there is a Godhead. So there are different ways of looking at the same phenomena. We only change names. We believe in gods. In India, anybody with an abundance of certain energy in whatever direction, a man with great learning, is respected and revered as a god. What does it mean? You may not acknowledge Saraswati. That's okay, but he's a child of Saraswati. Or when you say Shivaji, the great warrior, you may not use the word Durga, but he's a manifestation of Durga. So in one way or the other, human beings acknowledge the gods in their workings. Whether they use the word God or not, gods don't really mind it. They are just doing the labor, their job. And human beings can participate, should participate as co-hosts and collaborators in that great work.
I have one point here. Gods is a Western term. It has other meanings, but they tend to have a lower level. Devatas are cosmic principles, and they're universal powers, and they exist on all levels of existence. We talk about Agni, from Jatar Agni all the way to Brahma Agni. We have Lord Skanda, who is also Agni, has taken a form of Agni. So they're not to be limited like, they're also devas who are advanced beings. That's a different thing. And even the gods interpenetrate. Some people say, oh, there's no Shiva in the Vedas because the word Shiva isn't prominent there. Rudra is there. But if you look at Shiva, Shiva has three eyes, Agni, Soma, Surya, which are the three main deities. He has three powers, the right eye, left eye, and the third eye, which are the three main deities of the Vedas. And Indra is his lightning form, the four forms of light. So these same principles manifest at different levels. They may have different names at different times, but they exist within us, and they exist at both universal levels and personal levels. They are cosmic powers. How many forms of Agni? Even the nuclear bomb is a form of Agni in some ways. These are the powers in the universe. So we need to move beyond an anthropomorphic idea of a God to the cosmic principles to understand the Vedas and to understand the Vedic cosmology, because the Vedic mantras are reflecting the power of the universe. You know that there is the spontaneous mantra that exists in space. Chitakasha has its own mantric power. That is where the Vedas come from. Human speech is way down the line. So we need that universal vision, or vision that unites, like the Purusha. The entire universe is one being, but that one being is also more than any particular form. Hari Om.
Thank you. So I'll take a question from T.Y. Srinivas Iyengar. We should not say the Vedas, but in singular, Veda, since the parts are just of the whole. We should also not say the Veda, like no one says the God. There is only Veda. It is the sonic form of creation. Hence, it should be the secret of Veda. Agreed or not?
I would generally agree, of course, semantic issues and things that are published, and then whether you're referring to Vedas as these different texts. It's very interesting to note that the Rig Veda is foundation of the other Vedas. Most of the mantras, devatas, are explained there. But it's also even said in the Vedas are ananta, they're innumerable. And because the Vedas are innumerable, you do certain of these specialized mantras. So Veda is there as truth, and Veda also means vision. Even the term video comes out of Vidya, by the way, via the Greeks. So we should understand Veda as a singular reality, but Veda also has endless manifestations, and Veda is the cosmic speech that covers everything. Hari Om.
So I will group here two questions of two different persons, Jyoti Chalrajan and Ranjan Sengupta. Sri Aurobindo and Bal Gangadhar Tilak had great respect for each other and did think alike. Is there any evidence that Sri Aurobindo also ascribed to Tilak's idea of Arctic Om of Vedas, which is also what Jyoti Rajan Chal was asking about the origin from near the North Pole of the Aryans?
So Sri Aurobindo mentions it in the secret
I'll
of the...
look at that.
Yeah.
I was just going to say that, yeah, he's right. Sri Aurobindo mentioned it, but Sri Aurobindo doesn't follow that. And the reason is that Sri Aurobindo also embraces the idea of the samudra, the ocean, and the connections of all the cultures. You have to remember that when Tilak mentioned that there are some thoughts in Western thought that the cultures had come from the north. Tilak wasn't at the time when the Saraswati River was known. So had he been, I don't think he would have had this view. Now, his Orion book and the astronomy there is very interesting, and that is helpful. But I don't think that the Arctic theory was that valid product of the times, and I don't think Sri Aurobindo embraced it. And those in Aurobindo schools, whether Sethna or Jagan Mohan, et cetera, when this other knowledge came out, we have to remember, I always emphasize the maritime nature of the Vedas, and that always takes us to India and the multiple oceans. Hari Om.
Okay, a question from Andreas Freund. Could you say something about the significance of the Bindu in the Vedas? Is there a link between Bindu and Aurobindo? Thank you so much.
You know, Joel, if I could just interrupt too kindly, we have so many great questions here, and I know a lot of people have time limited. I'm wondering, Vamadeva and Dr. Pandey, if you might be willing to reconvene at another time to answer some of these questions. Might that be possible?
Yes, I think perhaps that would be better to have a Q&A session where all these questions can be collected, and then, we could come again like this at 7:45 or something.
Okay, perfect. So maybe, Joel, if you have a last question there or something, we can take it, and then we'll follow up with everyone for a next section.
Maybe the one I just asked about the relationship between Bindu and Aurobindo. Is there any?
No, not to my knowledge. So in any case, it is Sri Aurobindo, and Bindu is a different thing. So Sri Aurobindo, the word Aurobindo comes from, it is the dawn as well as Arvind. That's how it is in English. In Hindi, it is Arvind, means lotus, which represents the avatar. In Bengali, it becomes Aurobindo. And the Sri is not used as an epithet, but as the full name. And the mother spoke about it, and Nolnida has written a whole letter on it, that the name Sri Aurobindo is complete and carries a mantric power in it. So it is not Aurobindo, it is Sri Aurobindo. And as far as the Bindu and Bindu is concerned, well, Sri Aurobindo links the Bindu of the soul to the Mahasindhu, which is above. So that's the only connection. But from the name point of view, there is no such link. So Sri Aurobindo is a name complete in itself. Yeah, it means the lotus. And it's a Bengalization of the lotus. But because it has been adopted by Sri Aurobindo, it carries now with it a mantric power. So originally it is Arvind. Then at different times he had different names. And then finally, the name which can be considered as the yogic name of Sri Aurobindo is Sri Aurobindo. So Sri was not added as an honorific, which he makes it very, very clear. Yeah.
And of course, in Bengali, the Sanskrit V becomes B.
Yes.
So Aravinda is not Aurobindo. So it's an illusion of sound. Bindu is not actually there. It's Vinda for lotus, as you say.
If I may add, it's quite interesting from etymological point of view. Aravinda, Ara is the ray of light. Vinda is the same as Govinda. It's actually synonymous to Govinda. The one who, follows or finds Vindate is from Vid root. Panini describes this Vid root in two forms, Vind 6th class and Vid 2nd class. So it's always discovering, finding out, discovering the light. And these aras also, sahasrara, are the petals of or the rays. So discovering the rays of light, or the light. The same as Govinda. It's kind of interesting to know. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Let's close here. I would like to thank our esteemed panelists today for addressing such an important and relevant topic, and we will have most likely a follow-up to this webinar. I'll just invite everybody to close our program today with a moment of silence, invoking the Divine Mother and thanking Sri Aurobindo.